good one. Give me a good one. I was about to hit the jackpot.
She said the jackpot.
Alright, here we go. This is it. Neon turtleneck.
Ooh, okay.
I already love neon, so.
Yes.
As you can see.
Hey there, thanks for tuning in to So It Goes episode 1. So if you're new to this mini-series, So It Goes is basically a set of DIY challenges that myself and my buddy Hadassa will be taking on to just challenge ourselves and see what we can come up with. So in episode 1, we're gonna be tackling a neon turtleneck. So this is my variation of the neon turtleneck that can definitely be worn in the summertime. So check it out. Take your fabric and fold it in half and make sure that the wrong side of the fabric is facing up. Take a t-shirt that fits you really well, fold it in half and place it on top of the fabric. Then tuck in the sleeves so that basically the top pattern of the t-shirt is revealed. Decide how short you want your crop top to be and then fold the bottom of the t-shirt to match this desired length. Trace all around the t-shirt. I'm so sorry, but my tracing just would not show up, maybe because I was using white chalk. But in any case, you want to just pin the fabric down into place so that when it's time to cut, the fabric doesn't shift. You want to cut around the pattern and you want to leave a 1/2 inch space for seam allowance. You can draw a line to be more accurate with where to cut the seam allowance, or you can just freestyle it the way that I did. Then unpin your folded pattern, and then you want to transfer the other half of the pattern outline to the other side of the fabric, or to the other half of the fabric. Again, I apologize that the marking didn't show through, and it's because the fabric is so sheer and because it's lime green. So I'm gonna do my best to provide you guys with approximate drawings. To create the pattern for the back of the shirt, you want to repeat step 1, except this time when you fold your t-shirt, you want to make sure that the back of the t-shirt is facing on the outside of the fold. And then trace the t-shirt. Then cut about a 1/2 inch away from the pattern line. And if you want, you can go ahead and actually draw a seam allowance line for more accuracy, but you could also just freestyle it the way that I did. Then you want to unpin your pattern, unfold it, and then transfer the pattern outline to the other half of the pattern, the same way that we did with the front part of our pattern. So lay the front and the back pieces on top of each other so that the right sides are facing, and then you want to pin just the shoulder seam only on one side. So here you can see that I pinned the side seam and the shoulder seam, but you don't need to pin the side seam because we're not going to be sewing that just yet. So only the shoulder seam, and then we'll be sewing the shoulder seam. After you have finished sewing the shoulder seam, you want to open up the pattern, and then you want to just measure the length of the neckline after the pattern has been opened. And I suggest you use a measuring tape since the measuring tape is a bit more flexible. And in the end, I got 19.5. Then you want to make a rectangular pattern like this, which will be the turtleneck part of your crop top. And the height of the pattern should be 3 inches without seam allowance. And then the width of the pattern should be whatever measurement you got for the length of your neckline in the previous step. So for me, it was 19.5. So take your pattern and open it so that it is right side facing up, and the neckline should basically be in the shape of a horseshoe or a U. And then you want to take the pattern for your turtleneck and you want to face it so that the right side is facing down. So basically the right sides should be facing each other. And then you are going to line up the edge of the turtleneck pattern with the edge of the body of the shirt, and you're just going to pin the edges down all the way around the neckline of the body of the pattern. Since it can be a little tricky to sew along a curved line, what I'm doing is I'm just taking my scissors and I'm making little snip like clippings along the neckline so that it is a little bit more flexible and it's easier to sew. Then sew the neckline like so. So now you want to take the top edge of your neckline and you want to fold it so that that raw seam is inside of the folded neckline, and then you're just going to pin it down into place all around the neckline. Now if you don't have a finished edge the way that I do, you could just fold over the edge of the neckline before pinning it down, but it's not necessary. Then you're gonna sew all along the edge of where the neckline is folded. When you're finished sewing, the neckline should look like this. Then you wanna flip your pattern like so that the wrong side is facing out. Pin down the shoulder seam and then sew it about a 1/2 inch in from the edge. Lay out your fabric flat so that the wrong side is facing up. You're not folding your fabric. Then you want to place your pattern onto your fabric and you want to open it so that the armhole is completely open and stretched out and flat like so. Then you're just going to trace the curve of the armhole. After you've traced the curve of the armhole, you're going to make a mark for where the middle of the armhole is, and then you're going to add a notch to indicate the back of the pattern. So for the back of the pattern, I did 2 notches, and for the front of the pattern, I did 1 notch. And you're also going to transfer these notches to the actual pattern itself as well as to the sleeve, so that for future reference, you know where the back of your shirt is and where the front of your shirt is when you have to put it on. Then from your middle notch, you want to measure and mark the distance from your shoulder to your wrist. So for me, that was 23.5 inches. Measure the circumference of your wrist and then divide it by 2. So my wrist is 7.5 inches divided by 2 is 3.75 inches. You're going to use that half measurement to be the middle of your line for your wrist on the pattern. So I'm going to take my ruler and I'm going to line it up with the mark for my wrist, and I'm going to line it up where my ruler says 3.75. Then from there, I'm going to draw a straight line across. That way I know that the middle of my straight line across is 3.75 inches. Leave me a comment if you don't understand this part. Connect each end of the armhole curve to each edge of the line, like so. After you finish drawing the 2 connecting lines, you want to add a 1/2 inch seam allowance all around the sleeve pattern. Since we have 2 sleeves, we'll need to repeat these steps to make the second sleeve. So remember that once you have made the second sleeve, you also want to add seam allowance around it as well. Then cut out the 2 sleeve patterns like so. Lay the body of your crop top so that the right side is facing up, and then take your sleeve and sandwich it on top of the body of the crop top, and just line up the middle notch of the sleeve with the middle notch of the armhole, and then begin pinning all along the armhole of the crop top. Once you finish pinning the sleeve to the body of the shirt along the armhole, you want to just sew about a 1/2 inch away from the edge of the armhole, and this is the seam allowance basically. And this is what your sleeve should look like after you've finished sewing. And just remember that you should be using a zigzag stitch since this is stretchy fabric. So you want to repeat the same step for the other sleeve. And just to recap the instructions, you're taking your sleeve and you're sandwiching it on top of the body of the shirt so that the right side of the sleeve is facing the right side of the body of the shirt. And then you're going to line it up so that the middle notch of the sleeve lines up with the middle notch of the body of the shirt. and then you're going to pin it down and then sew along the armhole curve. Remember to use a zigzag stitch, and if you are having any trouble with sewing stretchy fabric, then you want to refer to my video about how to sew stretchy fabric without it puckering or wavering. Now that our sleeves are attached, we want to go ahead and create a lettuce hem for the bottom of the front and the back of the body of the shirt, as well as the bottom of both sleeves. And before we make the lettuce hem, we have to first fold over each of these pieces that I said need to become a lettuce hem. We have to fold them over and then pin them as though we were creating a regular hem. Oh, and also the turtleneck itself will also become a lettuce as well, and we don't really need to do anything to prep the actual turtleneck. So in order to get the lettuce hem effect, you want to start sewing your hem normally until the fabric slightly reaches the back of the presser foot, and then you're going to grab onto the thread tails, and you're just going to use the thread to pull the fabric as it goes underneath the needle. And you want to be pulling from both sides, so from the front and from the back, and you want to pull tightly but not to the point that it breaks your needle. For my machine settings, I used a zigzag stitch. For the length, I used 2.5. I know that most tutorials say to use the shortest length, but I can say for sure that it really depends on your machine. So just play around with the different lengths to see what works for you. For the width, I used the widest width, which was 5 for my machine, but again, it might be different for yours, so just play around with some scrap fabric before you actually do this on your garment. The other thing to keep in mind is that when you first create the lettuce hem, you probably won't necessarily see a drastic effect of the lettuce hem. You might have to just keep doing it a few times, to keep going over it a few times before you actually see like a very decorative kind of lettuce hem. Depending on how many layers of stitches you do, you may or may not end up with this kind of excess fabric that's hanging outside of the stitches, and if you do, you can just take some scissors and clip it off, but be careful not to poke a hole through your fabric. Your lettuce hems should look like this, and now you want to fold your shirt so that it is inside out. After you have folded the shirt, you want to pin the seams of the sleeves as well as the sides of the body. And this is how my top turned out. I'm super happy with it. To be honest with you guys, the top that I made for this tutorial came out a little bit too small, so I ended up remaking it, and this shirt right here is the second version of it. The tutorial for this pencil skirt that I'm wearing right here is listed below in the description box, so go and take a look and stick around for the next episode where Hadassa and I will be buying each other fabric and challenging each other to see what we can come up with. And Hadassa has no idea what kind of fabric I'm getting her, and likewise I don't know what she's getting me, so it should be pretty interesting. Until next time, ciao.